Hello and welcome to the May 2021 edition of the Pembrokeshire Bird Diary. I'm Annie Haycock from the Pembrokeshire Bird Group, here to share some of the highlights of the month. At the end of April, we noted there was a tall crane working at Withybush Hospital, towering over the buildings. What we didn't know until a few days later was that the Fire and Rescue Service were practising using their fancy new ladder, and in doing so were putting up bird boxes on the hospital buildings. This was part of a project funded by the Welsh Government's Local Places for Nature programme and delivered through the Pembrokeshire Nature Partnership. There are 18 swift nest box units, each with 4 nest chambers. Attracting swifts to a new site involves convincing them that swifts are already there, so the project includes 9 audio units to play swift calls at appropriate times. The boxes and audio units are being installed at fire stations and at Milford Haven Port Authority buildings, as well as the hospital. The project didn't stop at swift boxes. There are 5 double house martin boxes too, and Toby, a keen young birder, is here preparing 10 ordinary bird boxes to put up in the woods near Fleming Crescent in Haverfordwest. The first swifts arrived back from Africa in the last week of April, but the poor weather had held them up, and most of them seemed to be 7 to 10 days later than usual, as shown by the green line on the graph. Individuals often return to the same nests used in previous years, so these new boxes are more likely to be occupied by birds returning to nest for the first time. Another story of a bird nest, this time a natural nest, was reported by Derek Grimwood. Some friends of his had inadvertently dislodged a long-tailed tit's nest while they were cutting back gorse on their land. The nest held 2 eggs and 5 newly hatched chicks. They seemed to be doomed. Or were they? The nest was repositioned and attached securely with a cable tie. A trail cam was set up nearby to monitor it, and amazingly the adults came back and carried on as if nothing had happened. On May the 2nd, a lovely calm day, Ramsey Island welcomed its first visitors since October 2019. However, the pleasant start to the month was short-lived, and we were hit by storms of 60-mile-an-hour gales and an inch or so of rain in 24 hours. Seabirds seemed to take it in their stride, and damage to buildings on Skocombe at least was limited to rain being forced through cracks around windows. This is the view from the lantern room of the lighthouse. The stormy weather continued on and off for a couple of weeks, holding up migration and making it difficult to monitor bird populations. A few auks nesting low on cliffs lost their eggs, some puffin burrows were flooded, and parent birds gathered plant material to soak up the water or to raise up the egg above the saturated ground. May proved to be an interesting month for ringed birds. There were still good numbers of waders around at the beginning of the month. They included the ringed whimbrel from Guinea-Bissau that arrived at Newport last month. Gulls at Newport included another Mediterranean gull that was ringed as a nestling in the Vendée, western France in 2018. In February 2019 it was in Morocco. In April it was in Malaga in Spain, and in July in Brittany. There were no sightings in 2020, so why would it be at Newport in May 2021? Perhaps the clue is that it's not in full breeding plumage. An oyster catcher from Iceland that was seen at the Gann on April the 30th was at Kilpayson on May the 2nd. Another oyster catcher, X4 from Ireland, stayed around the Gann for most of the month. A sanderling ringed in the Netherlands spent some time in company with dunlin and ringed plovers. And a more unusual sighting at the Gann was a second calendar year curlew sandpiper that stayed around for a few days. This species is usually only seen on autumn migration. Dave Astins was doing some field work for the Urban Gull Survey of Wales when he came across a ringed lesser blackback gull amongst a roof nesting colony of mainly herring gulls in Milford Haven. The bird had been taken to a rehabilitation centre in Portugal, where it was taken care of for 5 days before being released on the 10th of March this year. Clearly a successful rehabilitation. Sedge warbler migration peaked at the beginning of May this year, and by the end of the month there had been 4 recoveries of ringed birds from elsewhere at the Teivi marshes. Birds migrating through are thought to be heading across the Irish Sea to breed, and one recovery is consistent with this. The others were birds ringed on southbound migration in France and Portugal. The one from Portugal was ringed in October 2015, making this at least its 6th summer. The oldest ever known bird survived to at least 8 years and 8 months old. We tend to think of siskins as resident birds in that they are with us all year round. However, some of them do migrate to and from the continent, while others make somewhat shorter journeys. One ringed in Boncath in March this year was found in Aberdeenshire 8 weeks later, and then another went from a Clarbeston Road garden to the Peebles in the Scottish borders, taking up to 10 days for that journey. And then another one was caught in that same garden, having been ringed in Neath a week earlier. Alison hadn't previously seen many siskins in her garden, so this was a real bonus. Elsewhere, the first local juvenile siskins of the year have been seen. Stonechats are fairly common around the Pembrokeshire coast, but they had been known to breed on Skocombe only in 1928 and again in 1932. Since then, they've been recorded only on passage or overwintering. This year, a pair of stonechats were hanging around well into April. They had been ringed last year and apparently overwintered. On April the 23rd, nesting was confirmed, and 2 days later the pair were feeding chicks. On May the 7th, the chicks fledged, though only one was ever seen, and it did survive to independence. The parents then got on with the process of producing a second brood. Stonechats seem to be doing well in general these days. They are vulnerable to prolonged bad weather in winter, but population indices from the BTO surveys increased steadily between the cold or wet winters of the early 1990s until 2010. Then a run of 3 bad winters knocked them back. Milder winters since then have allowed the population to expand and even surpass its previous known best. Still on Skocombe, the first great blackback gull and herring gull chicks were seen on the 15th of May, the earliest date of the last 5 years. On the 21st, puffins began to arrive with small fish, a sure sign that there are pufflings in the burrows. The new petrel station, that wall in the quarry designed specifically for the study of storm petrels, is clearly doing its job. On the 29th, the camera revealed a mating pair in box 11, a sight seen by very few people. If you thought migration should be over by late May, think again. On the 29th, a common rosefinch flew into a mist net by the well. While most rosefinches seen here are drab green-brown birds, this was a stunning red male. It is the 26th record for the island. Then on the 30th there was a female subalpine warbler at the well. Females are difficult to assign to species, the tail pattern narrowing this one down to a western subalpine warbler or perhaps a Maltese warbler. Hopefully DNA analysis of a dropped feather will provide more information. Also on the 30th, a turtle dove, once a common migrant but now barely an annual visitor to the island. On Skoma, Assistant Warden Kerris reports that the highlights of May included a gorgeous male grey-headed wagtail at Morey Mere on the 21st. This dazzling subspecies of the yellow wagtail breeds from North Scandinavia to northwestern Siberia and is occasionally seen in the UK on passage. There have been only 7 previous records in Pembrokeshire, and the last of them was in 1998. Several cuckoos passed through, including 5 on the 15th. Wimbrel, dunlin, green sandpiper and common sandpiper were also seen during the second half of the month. On the 24th, a spoonbill and an osprey were spotted by Dave Astins on one of his tours, compensation for the cold, the wet and the wind. Like Skocombe, Skoma also reported a western subalpine warbler on the 30th, a male this time, incredibly elusive but well worth the effort required to get brief views. Topping off the whole month, on the 31st, Leighton spotted a stunning lesser grey shrike at the farm, the island's first since 1993, and Kerris's first ever shrike. Well, that was a quick review of May. Thank you for watching, and I hope you'll look out for the next edition.